So for the parent, no, so for the child who is in that situation where they're going through the steps of early specialization and they're going through the sport, and it's not the natural flow of what I want to do. And my parents are kind of forcing me to do this and they're forcing me to do all these things. What should they do? Like, how should they handle a situation where mom and dad is forcing them to play basketball and they're forcing them to do football, whatever? How should they handle the situation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm going to actually give you a very HR answer because that's what I was growing up in. Is it really kind of depends on the individual, right? So the way that we approach the business is that we empower elite student athletes to create and execute the success formulas that work for them, right? Find the way that makes sense for them to play their game. And so in that kind of situation, would hope that the athlete has a relationship that is open enough to express those feelings, those thoughts, those emotions, those reactions, those whatever they're going through to their parents,
Mm-hmm.
and to have the relationship that's deep enough for the parents to open up and to be receptive of that. I will say, as a parent and as a former athlete, it can be extremely challenging to turn off how you would have approached that situation had you been in their shoes as an athlete. Well, I would have done this as you. Why can't you do this? Or whatever the case may be. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned as a parent of athletes, but also as a former athlete,
Mm-hmm.
it is not my game to play. It is not my journey to navigate. And while I want X, Y, and Z for them because I'm so attached to their outcomes, because they are my children, because I am so emotionally invested, it's my responsibility to find that safe barrier that I can absolutely listen to them, listen to their input, and kind of turn off my, well, this is what I would do. Well, let me find a solution for you. So going back to the original question, honestly, it's not necessarily just what the athlete, quote unquote, should do. There's also the component of where the parent comes into that equation as well, and how to navigate that conversation as a team versus opponents against one another or competitors against one another. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's totally natural, and certainly no judgment for anybody who goes through it, because fully transparency there. I've had those moments with my own child. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, not my
Mm-hmm.
journey. I've got to find a way to create that separation. But from a quote unquote should do, though I never say what anybody should do,
Mm-hmm.
to open up the lanes of communication as an athlete, even if it may be really uncomfortable.
Hmm. So, can you give a suggestion on how, maybe, say I'm not the most comfortable and this isn't, I don't have the relationship with mom and dad where I can just openly say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, this is what I'm going through. What is a suggestion or maybe some avenues that player could take to say, just introduce the talk of like, hey, you want me to play this, but I'd rather play that, or I'd rather, be a coach, or I'd rather, what I mean, something else to it. This isn't the avenue I want to take. So how could a player possibly take that path to that conversation?
Yeah, one avenue could be, check the relationship with coach. Our is that relationship maybe a little bit more open and comfortable and um, free of judgment, or at least less of judgment,
Mm-hmm.
to open up that conversation, talk with them, and ask for support from coach of, hey, what might be a possibility for me here, or could you possibly be with me as a part of this conversation? I'm really scared to have it. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. I'm concerned of what mom and dad might say. Just having someone else in their corner to support them through it. um, Sometimes another avenue, depending on where they fall in their family, or if they have siblings, maybe there's an older brother or sister who, could potentially also be part of that support system, or in place of coach, whatever the case may be, to support the athlete through that conversation. That one is so hard and nuanced because there's so many things and factors that come into that dynamic between a player and their parents, or an athlete and their parents. I guess generally speaking is, who within your community, and using that word figuratively
Mhm.
and literally, right? That you might be able to lean on to at least initiate a conversation. Because oftentimes, where our biggest stress come, whether you're an athlete or anybody, just general human, right? Is when we're keeping all of that truth inside and we don't necessarily have somewhere to put it, and we're just spinning and swirling in our own thoughts and emotions, and don't necessarily know how to navigate that. But oftentimes when we can at least speak our truth to someone we know may not come back and say, have some judgment, or tell us that we're wrong, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes when we can just release it at the very beginning, it helps to relieve the pressure that we've created within ourselves. So it would be, find somebody in your community or corner that you can actually open up to, or think you can open up to, and then start the conversations from there and see where they lead you, in order to kind of build up to mom and dad, if that's the big to do, the big challenge.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what about from the other side? What are some things that mom and dad should look for? Maybe, my child is hesitant to tell me they're not the most, we don't have that relationship, but what are some things that the parent could look for to say, maybe my kid wants to tell me this, but they're not telling me? What are some things that I could look for as a parent? Not me, but a parent could look for to be like, okay.
Yeah, so I'll use my own personal experience, because it took me a while to really kind of understand my older son. One of his telltale signs is when he has a very emotional or angry reaction to something small, and it was kind of like, wait a minute, that response was a little bit more than what the situation called for, right? And I'll have this kind of moment of, oh, wait a minute, I wonder if there's something deeper that's going on. And typically that's what it is with my son. Like, he'll have a higher level emotional reaction to something very small, and it'll kind of come out of nowhere, until I sit down and ask the question, hey buddy, is this what you're really mad at? And just being able to ask a question versus make a directive, or tell him what he's doing wrong, or have a judgmental reaction to his reaction that I thought was kind of quote unquote over the top. By noticing maybe some of those kinds of behaviors, and then asking questions and inviting them in, um, has proven for me as a parent, both and as a coach to athletes, that works. It's really about watching your child's cues, because my younger son is completely different. I mean, he'll come up to me and be like, "Mom, this is what's going on. I don't know what to do. What, like, let's engage in this conversation." So every child is different, and oftentimes it's just getting into their cues. But once the gate is open, the go-to recommendation is to invite them in by asking questions. We as parents tend to have that, let me fix the problem, let me make sure I take all your pain away. I want to, whatever the case may be, whatever is going on, I want to be able to fix it and make it go away. Well, oftentimes as parents, when we do that, we remove the opportunity for our children to learn and process the situation for themselves, versus
Mhm.
through our lens of like, well, this is what I do. Go do this, talk to him, talk to her, this, and then, versus, well, what would you like to do in this situation? Or what would allow you to feel the most comfortable to have the conversation? Or how
Mhm.
do you want to show up? How can I support you in getting there? Right. And it's a completely different dynamic. Take some practice. I'm not going to lie. I often don't always get it right. But the moment that I can see even more emotion building up in my kids, that's when it's time to ask a question versus give a directive.
That's very interesting. I was actually thinking about this earlier today. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but I wonder if, as a parent, do you lose some of your emotional intelligence, and like you just kind of like, I think parenting is very difficult overall, and I think sometimes I've heard this before. You're parenting a generation behind, so you're parenting based off your childhood and what you wish you would have had or whatever. And so, do you think that plays a role into a lack of emotional intelligence when you're dealing with children or your child? And like, how do you think that plays a role into everything?
Well, that's a super interesting way of positioning it. And when you said it, it resonated, is that I will speak for myself. Yes, there are moments when I lose my own emotional intelligence, that I'm tuning more into what I'm thinking and feeling versus what either of my sons are thinking and feeling. And that comes from a very well-intentioned space of, in our situation, having so much love, having so much connection. It's like, I just want to be able to help fix whatever's going on. I want you to come out shining. I want you to be the best you can possibly be. And oftentimes, because there is that such deep connection, and we as parents are so tied to our children's outcomes, that our first go-to, and understandably, is through our own lens. And as you said, like, here's what happened when I was younger. This is what we did. And they're like, I don't care. I don't even know. In terms of my kids, like, I don't even know half the things that were like existed when you were kids. Like, none of that exists anymore, right? So
Mhm.
there's that lack of connection in that respect. So, I mean, it's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, to a degree, yeah, you kind of lose a little bit of your emotional intelligence because, and again, not every situation is like this, but because
Yeah.
you're so attached to what happens to them, it's just like, I just want to make it better for you.
Mhm.
But the only way we know how to make it better is through what we've been through and how we've gone through it, not realizing they're not us. They're a combination of us, but even the stuff that they have that comes from us isn't expressed or doesn't get expressed in the same way. So yeah, we share DNA, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always the same.
Mhm.
If that makes any sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So how could a parent separate? They want, like, of course, most parents have good intentions when they're doing what they're doing,
For sure.
but how can you separate the the act of good intentions, separating that from the negative outcome of what you have? Like, yes, I have good intentions, and I keep having good intentions, but the outcome isn't what I want it to be. And of course, you're seeing it impact your child. So how can I like tweak good intentions? Say, well, I have good intentions, and that doesn't negate the fact that this hurts the child. So how can we improve that relationship, and what could a parent, look for and do?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's learning about yourself as a parent, and it's understanding what your value system is, where your trigger points come from, and working very consistently and very diligently to how do I put, like, honor yourself in the moment, but also honor your children. So, specific example of that. I, through most of my story, I was a very driven, internally driven individual. Like, no one has to tell me to go do something. I know what I want to do. Doesn't mean I always like fully initiate everything, but I know what I want to do. And once I'm in something, I will go for it. My children are not that way. My children take a little bit more of care and concern and nurturing in order to kind of rev them up and to get into something. And it wasn't until I started really working on myself that one of my biggest values is ambition, right? I love being surrounded by people who have just as much ambition, if not more than me, like people I can just like try to keep up with, right? That isn't a value for my son, even though as a parent, I'm trying to instill this ambition. It just doesn't translate the same for them. And
Mhm.
as I learned more about how ambition really shows up for me, I start to feel this like internal buzz in me, and I want to get going and I want to do. And when I start to feel that for myself, when I'm in the presence of my son's sports, there were times I will walk away. I would like take a walk. Like, let me just
Mhm.
like get a little bit of this energy out, because what can happen is that there's this concept of mirroring that can really happen with parents, is that because we are so attached to our children, we can create this unconscious sense that we are a part of the game with them, right? I mean, we've all seen parents who get so involved in the game, not gonna lie, I've been there myself, but it's because you're so drawn into the moment, and it's like you are actually out there playing, and it's like you're just as tied to their outcomes as they are. And so it's about recognizing for the buzz for me, like what's your buzz for you as a parent? Like what is it that you feel is drawing you in? But at the same time, some of those things can be a trigger. So for me, when there are times when my sons aren't like, come on, guys, let's go, let's find the internal motivation here. It can be a trigger for me because it's not as present in them as it is for me. And when I start to feel that frustration and that buzz more from a negative point, again, I'll remove myself from the situation to give myself a breather so that I can come back in a more neutral position and say, okay, I know what's going on here. I'm getting a little worked up because they're not necessarily doing it the way I would do it, right? That can be a moment for parents of like, oh, if that's the thought going through my mind, or that's the thing that's about to come out of my mouth, that can be the point of, oops, this is my line, it's not theirs.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's very important. And that kind of goes to I want to talk about anyway, but um I've trained a lot of players and coach players and just talked to different players where you kind of spoke about this earlier where the pressure builds up of what they're doing. And a lot of times I think a lot of the pressure comes from parents. Sometimes coaches too, but
Mhm.
most of it comes from parents and their expectations of, especially if you're following the footsteps of what a parent did. So you're
Mhm.
playing the same sport, or they were great at their sport, or they're great in general. So they're expecting the second coming of greatness, whatever that definition means for that relationship. How can a player deal with that pressure and the stress of parent expects so much from me, but I just want to have fun or I just enjoy doing it? Like, how can a player deal with that when they're dealing with the pressure from mom and dad?
Yeah. But part of it is recognizing that it's even there. Oftentimes we, as humans, right, we get so wrapped up in the pressure that sometimes it becomes such a pattern that we don't necessarily recognize where it comes from. And that's the beauty of what we do, is that part of the idea of creating a success formula that works for you is understanding at the root of what's going on, what is creating the block. And it's about having a support system around you that allows you the opportunity to explore where it's coming from. Because sometimes it can be so ingrained that the answer, I don't know, I just always feel this pressure, and they may no longer be conscious of where it started, because maybe mom and dad never say anything, right? But because we're so interconnected, say anything maybe as directly, but because we're so interconnected, not only as a family but as humans, like that that energy can be experienced. And so sometimes the players may not necessarily know where it's coming from, but in order to deal with it, it's really about figuring out the root cause and not just uh, trying to fix the symptoms. Like, obviously we all know like what it looks like for a player to be under pressure, but in order to overcome that, the ways of doing it is going to be different based on where it actually comes from. And that's where we're a little different, is that it's not just about like, oh, we'll help you deal with the pressure and here's tactics to go deal with the pressure. We try to figure out where that pressure truly is coming from. And oftentimes it really is like talking it out, becoming aware of it in order to figure out how to deal with it. Very nebulous answer that I recognize. However, that's what we believe, and that's the philosophy we follow, is that, it's not this, while pressure can come out looking the same, it
Mhm.
didn't always start in the same place or from the same source. And the best way to get over it is figure out where that source is coming from.
Look, let's be serious, man. Stop playing around. All right. You didn't got too comfortable. You didn't got relaxed. You forgot that you still got people behind you chasing you right now. You still got people to catch up to. You think just because you won a championship or you had a pretty good game last time that you can relax now. We ain't gonna write none of that stuff. Your goal right now is to look at how you were yesterday. Look at the player you were last night. Figure out how to be better than that person. Right now is you versus you. Your goal right now is to make progress in the person that you were last night, the person that you were yesterday. Be the person this week should be the person from last week. The person this month should be the person from last month. On the court and off the court. personal development too. So right now, progress is the only goal. We ain't worried about what other people got going on. Focus on progress. It's you versus you. It's me versus me. So that right there is your mission. That's your goal. I don't care about who say the best in state is. Who I don't care about any of that. Your goal right now is to be better than you were yesterday. I don't care if you struggling to make the team. I don't care if you the last player they're looking at to make the team. We ain't worry about none of that. Your goal right now is to be better than you were yesterday. I don't care if you're the number one player in the nation. Could care less. Your goal right now is to be better than you were yesterday. So go ahead and get you one of these because you need that reminder because you got too comfortable. That's the issue. You got too comfortable. This can't get you comfortable right here. So go ahead, get you a reminder, get you like a flag hanging as a reminder. Say progress is on the goal.